Hey everyone!
Hello and welcome to our second episode in our series all about change. And today we're going to be looking at perspective.
Sometimes the hardest thing to change is our attitude towards something when the thing itself doesn't change. Life is often not ideal, but there comes a point when accepting where you're at liberates you to live as best you can in the situation you're in. For us, our hope is in what is yet to come, and we've come to accept life's messy nature and imperfect circumstances. Now is a perfect time for a perspective change.
Yeah, so obviously perspective is something that maybe we think about, but I think it's something that's maybe more subconscious as well. Sometimes we realize it's there, sometimes we don't kind of realize that it's there. And I think that at the moment, because of the state that we're in our world, we've actually been thinking about it a lot. We've been forced to change the way that we have been living. We can't do things that we would usually maybe take for granted. And we've, I think, valued things a lot more. We met up with some friends today and we were talking about how in lockdown we loved just going for walks and how that seemed to be a big thing in the UK at least, of people just walking and getting out and exercising every day. And so people's perspectives have kind of been shifting in big ways and in little ways as a result of that. And I know that for us, we've been thinking a lot about different things and our lives in general, and how we are relating to other people and the things that we prioritize in life.
Yeah.
And we've been thinking a lot about what are we focusing on, and or what should we be focusing on. And so I think that's been a really important thing for us. And at the moment, we're in a situation where we can't ignore the pandemic and the situation that us in our world are facing at this time. We can't make it go away as much as we wish it would go away. It isn't going away. And so we have a decision to make collectively as, humanity, but also as individuals of, are we going to try and change the situation by doing certain things, or maybe not doing certain things like obeying certain rules or whatever, or are we going to change our perspective to the situation? And I think that if we want to be people that can really make a difference at this time, we need to see a change in perspective on the situation, and rather than seeing it as it's taking away this, that and the other, try and see the opportunities that it presents instead. And I think we're not saying that we've got it all right with that, but it's a constant process, I think, isn't it, to go on that journey?
Yeah, it really is. And obviously, quite an extreme situation like the one we're in at the moment definitely highlights this, but it is something that is constant. Like last week, we were talking about how change is a constant thing in life that will always happen. I think our perspective is something that will always be in need of revisiting as well. But this time has definitely, certainly for us, brought that to the surface and reminded us of the importance of what our outlook on life is.
Yeah.
And in a way, the very negative things that the pandemic has brought is also highlighting the importance of the positive things in our life. And I'm thinking of, maybe like in World War II, it probably made people completely rethink about the way they lived life.
Yeah.
And as much as difficult situations are a pain to go through and they bring, tragedy and loss and, so many negative things, they also really help us to come back to what the point of living is.
What really matters.
What really matters, yeah. It strips away all of what we can complicate and add on and helps us to really see, the beautiful, positive things in life, just like the simplicity of going on a walk and how amazing that is. Like, I remember telling you, I think on Friday night, we were just chatting about what we've learned in the past week. And I was just reminded of how much, at least for me, and I'm sure for many other people and for you, just going on a walk literally sends me to a different place. And mentally, I feel so much better. And I don't know if I'd really thought about this before. But it's this idea of a perspective change also reminds you to count your blessings. And we were talking about earlier about this proverb, I think it is really, that familiarity breeds contempt. And sometimes when we live something, especially in the West, when where we're so comfortable, we forget how blessed we are. We forget how much we have. And yeah, we were just talking about the importance of changing our perspective on realizing what we have in the midst of things that are really not good sometimes. But also, in order to change your perspective, I think we have to understand that it takes looking beyond ourselves and zooming out and really taking the big picture. And that doesn't negate what you're going through and what you're facing on an individual level. But I mean, especially in a situation like this with COVID, we're all going through it. So yeah, like your life might suck, but the thing is, the whole world is in the same boat at the moment.
It's quite a good analogy, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, it is. It's true. And I think zooming out also reminds us that we might be in something, we have a certain perspective on something, but there are so many different angles at which to come to it. And I think a perspective change keeps you humble. It reminds you that it's not just about you.
Yeah.
And it's not that we mean to do it necessarily, I think, but we can get a bit proud sometimes to think that our perspective is the only thing that matters because we're the one in it. But when you zoom out and think about other people and what others are going through as well, it just, it keeps you humble. And it's interesting because last week when we talked about cultural change and how to approach that, our bottom line was about humility, that humility is the key thing that you need for that. And the more I think about change, the more I think humility and change are very, very closely linked. And for me, a perspective change is a really good process to go through because it brings you back to that place of humility.
Yeah, definitely. And I think humility is something that allows us to not think, like you say, too highly of our own perspective and to be prepared that we could be wrong about things. I think one thing that I've learned in lockdown is we're seeing a lot of polarizing in our world today. You know, it's either you're, I don't know, Trump or Biden is the biggest thing in the world, probably at the moment with the American politics, or you're either for Black Lives Matter or you're saying all lives matter. It's either this or it's that. It's either that or you're, you know, either you stand up for people that are oppressed or you're racist. There's very little grey areas. And I think one thing that I've tried to do is to listen to both sides of arguments and try and get different perspectives that then informs my own perspective. And it's not that it's bad to have a perspective yourself, but it's learning how to process thoughts and ideas to help inform your decision, so it's actually informed. It's not dictated to you by someone else. And I think the other thing that's really important to realize with perspective is that we can't wait for our situations to change our perspective.
Totally.
And you know,
We
like,
wait forever.
yeah, and every time we set up in this room to do a podcast, I always think, oh, this is so small. You know, everything's like not like easy to do. It takes ages to set up. Like, it's now dark, which is annoying for the light for the video. But at the same time, we do have, you know, the equipment to do this.
Well,
We
it's
have
such a tiny thing when you put it in perspective to
exactly, yeah.
everything we have.
And it's important to take time to think about that and process it, reflect and say, okay, I can get on with it. And you said about zooming out. I also think it's important to then zoom right in and to value the little things in life. And I think one thing that lockdown and COVID and the pandemic has taught us is what is really valuable. And it's very simple things. It's family. It's the fact that you can have a cup of tea and break up your day a bit. You can go on a walk. And I think it's important to zoom out and see the bigger picture, but also zoom right in on those little things.
That's a really good point.
And one more analogy is what we've been talking about a lot is jobs. And, you know, maybe you're someone where you love your job, or maybe you're someone where your job is really difficult and you wish that you weren't in it and you would do anything to have another job. But I think if COVID has taught us anything, it's that we should just be grateful that we have a job, because so many people have lost their jobs and been made redundant because of the kind of result of the economic result of the pandemic, that now your perspective is completely different, because you're like, well, actually, at least I have a job, at least my sector that I've studied in and I was hating before, at least I know now that it's a really safe sector for example. And I think that that's something that really gives a really good picture of what we're talking about today. You can't change your situation sometimes, but you can change your perspective, and that then could change everything.
Yeah, almost you have to change your perspective, because that's the only way of facing the constant change that life will bring, constant
Yeah.
changes that life will bring, and that change of perspective is what brings you to a place where you can live life fully and enjoy life, even when
Yeah.
life is not enjoyable. And I can't stop thinking of there's a passage in the Bible that talks about contentment and how interlinked perspective and contentment are. Just want to read this passage real quick. It's in Philippians 4. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And that thing of learning the secret of being content, I feel like we might have touched on it in another podcast
Yeah.
at the beginning, but that's such a key to life.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this as if like I've nailed this, because I'm totally learning this still, and it probably is, especially in the West, something you learn your whole life, to break free of that constant desire for more and for greed and everything.
Yeah, like materialism and stuff.
Yeah, totally. But that key of the secret of being content, and if there's anything that we could encourage you to do today, is try and dig in that secret of being content and what that means.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think the other thing is, if you look at, like, we've kind of looked at two different sides of perspective. We've looked at the thing of like us changing our perspective towards something, but then also having a good perspective on life in general, if that makes sense. Like, so
Yeah.
changing your perspective to a particular circumstance that you can't change the situation, and maybe it's a bad situation, but the only thing that maybe you can change is your perspective. And then that enables you to step out and do the right thing. But then there's also this kind of idea of perspective on a larger scale, of your perspective of life as a whole. And I think that those two things are interlinked, if that makes
Yes.
sense.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes it's hard to strike the balance, because you don't want to be naive. And a life is amazing, but life is also hard. And you don't want to just like come at it with a naive, like happy clappy character, like, oh, everything is amazing. But at the same time, I mean, even in terms of like a biological thing in our brain, to think positively changes your physical being, your emotional being, your
Yeah.
everything. And to constantly kind of push yourself to see the best in a situation is so important. Like, one of the things I do is I have this little journal where I answer a question every night, and it helps me to reflect on the day and to just think of all the things that have gone on. And sometimes I have great days and sometimes I have bad days like everyone else. But one of the other things I used to do, and I was just thinking I should do this again, is I used to write every day 3 things that I was thankful for at the end of the day. And it's such a tiny thing to do, but that you can do, but it really helps to change your perspective on things.
Yeah.
And that also makes me think about like how much we talk together about things. And I think we both process things by talking to each other quite a lot. And that reminds me of the importance of discussion when it comes to that perspective change. Because first of all, just to come back to that humility, the point about humility that we made earlier, when you talk to someone about something, you have to be open, otherwise the conversation's going nowhere. You have to be willing to be wrong and to have your perspective changed.
Yeah.
But also,
Otherwise, it's not a conversation, is it? And we've all
It's
been in
talking at
those.
someone.
Yeah, we've all been in those situations where someone is talking at you, not
Yeah.
with you. and it's just so frustrating.
Yeah, it is pointless. Um, and like, I think often in conversations, I'm quite prone to be cynical, I think. I approach things often with quite a negative outlook. I look at like the bad things before I look at the positive points. Would you agree with that?
Maybe.
A little bit. Now, I admit that I can be quite cynical, but that's why for me it's so important to be able to discuss things, because I can then also like reflect on my own attitude and how I can't be living life like this, you know. I think it's good to not, like I said earlier, to not be naive, and sometimes cynicism helps you to see things for what they are. But at the same time, you need people to come in and be like, no, but have you thought about that angle of things?
Yeah.
I remember, I think it was last week or a couple of weeks ago, we both listened to this radio program thing where these people were discussing a situation, and this guy had basically like turned away from the Christian faith, and he was talking to this lady who was a Christian apologist, and they were talking about this situation of how like he went to this really poor country in Africa and saw the suffering there, and was saying like, how could there ever be a God when I saw all of this? And this lady who was a Christian had also gone to the actual same village, I think, or tribe,
Yeah. Yeah.
and she was coming at it from a totally different perspective. And I was thinking it's crazy how these people have both lived the exact same experience, and yet they can, just by the way you look at it, it completely changes your whole life, literally like your belief system and the way you're going to set up your life.
Yeah.
So, yes, discussion is very central.
Yeah, and I think that I mentioned it earlier with what we see in the States at the moment, the discussion has become so polarized and so negative.
Aggressive.
And yeah, like us looking at it from here, it's almost crazy, like what's going on, and just generally what's going on in the United States. It's supposedly, and it is one of the greatest nations in the world. It's, a democracy. It's so far ahead of the rest of the world in so many things, and yet
It's built on good principles.
it's built on these principles, and yet we see this result now of so much conflict. Some people think that the states could be on the verge of civil war, and the racism stuff that's been going on, so polarized with the politics, polarized with the virus itself, education, abortion, so many of these issues, and it's a tipping point almost. And I think that one of the big things is the art of conversation is so key in times like this.
I like this, the art of conversation.
Yeah, and how to talk to other people, but more importantly, how to listen. And my thing is listen to understand, not to respond. And I think that is so important, that we as people should listen to understand the way that someone, how have you come to that opinion? What is it that's made you form that idea? And I might not agree with the idea at all. It might be like awful, but I'm going to come and I'm going to listen to understand. It makes me think of a guy who, he was a black guy, and he, decided to befriend one of the leaders in the KKK.
Yeah, I remember that.
And he just got to know him, and he went and he asked him loads of questions. He didn't go saying, some things that he could have said about how he was dehumanizing him as a person and all this. He just went and just asked him loads of questions. And gradually he actually built up a friendship with this guy. He used to go round to his house for dinner. He would come round to his house. He met his wife and his family, and he tried to get in the mind of this guy and think, I want to understand why you think this about me. So I'm going to do all that I can to do that. And what he found then was that the guy would come to him, and then he'd want to know why he thought about certain things. And because the guy probably was ignorant that this guy is just a person like him, he has every right to exist as he does, and all of this kind of stuff. Actually, this guy ends up leaving the KKK, and this black man has single-handedly led to about 40 people leaving the KKK, and that came from listening. And it makes you think, what could we do? What could I do if I was to apply that same principle
Yeah.
of I'm going to listen to people, I'm going to go out of my way to go and make contact with people that are completely different to me so that I can understand why do you think what you think, and then maybe we can have a discussion and both of us will move forward and become, more
Yes.
rounded individuals as a result of that.
Yeah, you're not going into the conversation to win an argument, but to have a conversation. And I feel like we've really mixed up what an argument and a conversation are. They're
Yeah.
not the same thing,
Yeah.
but they often turn into the same thing. And with what you were saying, it also made me think, if we flip it on its head, because we've talked mostly about our perspective on things, but if you see something in someone that you think needs to change, that their perspective on something needs to change, you almost have to infiltrate their thought process and, like you said, listen to understand. And once you've integrated that, you can then, you're in such a powerful position if you're there, because you've actually understood where they're at.
Yeah.
And I think we have to remember, we're always treating humans, we're relating to human beings. We can't depersonalize people and think this is just my opponent and I have to win this thing and I have to be right. And again,
Yeah.
it comes back to this thing of humility, that it's not wrong to have a perspective, and we should have perspective on things. We should have opinions, but we should know why we have these opinions, and we should always be in the place of being willing to revisit those opinions and perspective. And the things that we go through in life are a constant reminder of this reality. The changes that we go through in life are encouragements for us to humbly look at ourselves and reconsider our perspectives, and perhaps look to another perspective that would help us to go through the situation we're in,
Yeah.
individually but also corporately.
Definitely. Yeah. That seems like a good place to wrap it up to me.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so hopefully that's been helpful. And just to kind of recap, we've been talking about perspective and how we might not be able to change certain situations. And a big example of that at the moment is coronavirus. We can't change it, but we can change our perspective within that. And as we do that, we can then begin to zoom out and see the world bigger picture, that actually, if we compare ourselves, not in a bad way, but in a good way, to other people around the world, it can encourage us that actually we're not as bad off as we thought. And we can then zoom in and appreciate the little things in life as well. And more than that, we can even go to have conversations with people that we might completely disagree with, but we go and we listen to understand, not to respond. And we can actually begin to break down bridges and barriers, just because our perspective towards people, towards situations, towards conversations, towards whatever the issue is that you want to talk about has actually moved on, or our perspective towards perspective has changed, if you like, as well. Yeah.
Like the perspective inception.
Yeah, it is.
Great. Well, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.